The sun hadn't yet burned off the morning chill when Silas Greeley rode into Junction Hollow. He came in quiet, like all men who've killed more than they've counted, and lived long enough to regret most of them. Dust clung to his coat. His hat was pinned low, and the butt of a double-action Colt peeked just enough from his holster to let fools know better. The sheriff tipped his hat and made himself scarce. Silas liked that. He didn't come to talk. He came for a man. A stranger had been seen around town 3 days running. Didn't gamble, didn't drink, didn't talk. Rented the corner stall at the livery and never left town. But what got Silas's attention wasn't the man. It was the baby. A child, not older than 2, always on his hip or cradled in the crook of his arm. No one knew her name. No one knew his. But a wire came through from Amarillo 2 nights prior, and the name printed in bold across it was enough to turn Silas around in his saddle and ride. J.R. Callahan, the wire said, traveling under no name. Wanted for obstruction, suspected theft of classified mail, and possible treason. Carrying infant. Apprehend and hold. Silas didn't care about treason. He'd seen worse crimes go unpunished and better men hanged. But the price on Callahan's head was steep and personal. He found the man just after noon, outside the livery, nailing a new horseshoe on a mule that looked like it had come out of retirement just to die. The stranger didn't look up. The baby, half asleep against his chest, stirred as Silas dismounted. "You Callahan?" Silas asked. The man didn't answer. "I'm talking to you, stranger." The hammer paused mid-swing, then lowered. Slowly the man stood and turned. Brown hair sun-bleached at the tips, jaw lined with dust and stubble. But the eyes, green, guarded, and empty of apology, met Silas's square. "I've been called worse," he said. Silas stepped forward. "You're wanted." "Most men are. I got your name in a wire. I ain't got a name worth using." Silas looked at the baby, now peering up at him with wide eyes. "That child yours?" "No," the man said. "Then whose? Does it matter?" Silas's jaw tightened. "I've got orders to bring you in." The man shifted his weight, careful not to wake the baby fully. "I ain't resistin', just askin' you not to wake her." Silas studied him. "Why you carrying a child that ain't yours?" The man looked away. "Some debts can't be paid in silver." Silas pulled out a pair of irons. "You'll hand her to the sheriff." "No," the man said quietly. "She ain't yours. She's got nobody else. Don't make you a saint. Might make you worse." The baby whimpered, then reached for the stranger's collar, and then, barely above a whisper, she said a name. "Jonah." Silas froze. His mouth opened. "What did she say?" The man blinked, startled. "She doesn't speak often. She just said, Jonah." The stranger looked confused. Maybe it's something she remembers. Silas stared hard at him. "You know what that name means to me?" The man said nothing. Silas stepped closer. "Jonah Greeley was my brother." The stranger stiffened. "Then you know who I am," Silas said. The man nodded slowly. "You're the man who never answered his letters." Silas's jaw clenched. His hand drifted toward the irons again. "You're carrying my kin's name on a child's lips. You better start explaining before I do something I don't walk back from." The stranger looked down at the child. "She spoke his name," he said quietly, "because that's who she remembers holding her before the fire." Silas blinked. "What fire?" But the man didn't answer. Instead, he reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope, sealed with wax, cracked by heat and age. He held it out. "Jonah gave me this," he said. "Said if anything happened, I was to find someone with a name worth trusting." Silas didn't take it. "What's in it?" The man's eyes held. "Truth, or the reason they killed him?" The baby whimpered again, one hand closing around the front of the stranger's coat. Silas looked down at her, at the eyes that were too familiar, too much like Jonah's. "I need to read that," he said finally. The man nodded. "Not here." "Then where?" "Where your brother's buried." The name hung between them like smoke. Silas clenched his fists. "Then I reckon we ride." And with that, they mounted in silence, bounty hunter, stranger, and child, riding not just toward a grave, but toward something heavier than justice, toward kin. They rode in silence, the town shrinking behind them like a secret nobody wanted to keep. The baby had fallen asleep again, cheek pressed against the stranger's shoulder. Every so often she made a small sound, half breath, half word, but never cried. Silas watched them from a few lengths back, his mind grinding like an old mill. Jonah. That name wasn't just ink on a grave. It was 30 years of guilt, folded into a man he hadn't seen since before the war. Last time he'd heard it, Jonah was sending letters about corruption in the territory marshal's office, letters Silas had never answered. Now here he was, following a man who claimed to have been with Jonah at the end. At dusk, they reached the old mission at Dry Rock Bluff. The chapel was gone, burned in a storm 10 winters ago, but the graveyard remained. Sun-bleached stones crooked in the earth like broken teeth. The stranger dismounted and moved toward one in the far corner, half hidden behind a mesquite tree. He knelt, cleared the dirt with one hand. Jonah Greeley, born 1843, died 1879. The truth will outlive the fire. Silas stood a long moment before stepping forward. He hadn't known the headstone existed, hadn't known his brother had died that year. "Who buried him?" he asked. "I did," the stranger said, "with help." "You were there when he died?" The man nodded. "Tell me." The stranger shifted, kept the baby nestled close. He was investigating land transfers, illegal ones, marshals signing deeds to mining interests. He came to testify. Someone burned down the circuit judge's house the night before. Jonah was there. Silas closed his eyes. "You tried to save him?" The man didn't answer right away. "I pulled him from the fire. He was alive long enough to give me the child and the letter." Silas's voice cracked. "Who's the girl?" "She was in the house. No one else made it. Jonah told me to keep her safe." "You think she's his?" "I don't know," the man admitted, "but she knows his name, and she trusts me. That's all I've got." Silas dropped to a knee by the grave. "I was his brother," he said. The stranger said nothing. "I should have come sooner." The baby stirred, reached out, touched the stone, a tiny hand against etched granite. Then she whispered again, "Jonah." Silas looked up sharply. "That name don't come from nowhere." "I know," the man said. Silas stood, looked at the envelope still sealed in the stranger's hand. "Give me the letter." The man hesitated. "Why now?" "Because I buried my brother with silence," Silas said, "and I don't want to do the same to the truth." The man handed it over. Silas took it carefully. "Why didn't you read it?" "I promised." "To who?" "To the man I watched burn." That answer landed like a hammer. Silas broke the seal. Inside were 6 pages, tightly written. Names, figures, dates, Descriptions of the same land schemes Jonah had written him about years ago, now expanded, detailed, undeniable. But what caught his breath was the last paragraph. Silas, if you're reading this, I hope it means I got through to you after all. I know we left things broken. I know you walked one way, and I walked another. But I never stopped hoping you'd find the road back. This child's name is Emma. Her father was the judge who tried to expose the cartel. They killed him, burned the house. She doesn't cry much. She watches, like she's waiting for the world to prove it won't betray her. If she's alive, she's yours to protect now, like I was supposed to protect you, make it right. Jonah Silas folded the letter with shaking hands. He turned to the stranger. You could have sold her, left her. Hell shot me and ran, but you didn't. I made a promise. Silas nodded. She ain't my blood, but she's his. The baby reached for him, and for the first time in 20 years, Silas Greeley let someone reach back. They camped that night under the bent limbs of a lightning-struck cottonwood, moonlight cutting through charred branches like blades of glass. The stranger built a low fire and warmed the child's milk over the coals while Silas sat back against his saddle. The sealed letter returned to his breast pocket, resting heavy over the weight of everything he hadn't done when it mattered. The child, Emma, lay curled in the stranger's coat, clutching one of Silas's fingers in her sleep. She'd done that just before dusk, reached out on her own. No crying, no fear, just trust. It broke something loose in Silas, something that had been bricked in for years. You got a name? Silas asked, eyes still on the flames. The stranger hesitated. Callahan. That your real name? No. Silas looked over. Then what is? Callahan shrugged. I've been called too many things. That's the one that stuck. Silas watched the man's profile in the firelight. Creased, sun-bitten, hard from travel, but soft when he looked at the child. He'd seen men fake that softness. This wasn't that. You serve? Silas asked. Callahan nodded. Union Scout, Missouri and West. Same as Jonah. I know. Silas nodded. So why'd you run with a child and a letter instead of turning it all in? Callahan's jaw tightened. Because the men Jonah was fighting wore badges just like yours. The fire cracked. Silas didn't flinch. You accusing me? Callahan shook his head. Not yet. Silas didn't press further. A low owl call echoed across the rocks. Both men went still. Callahan rose slow, rifle in hand. Silas mirrored him. They stepped away from the fire just as two riders crested the ridge. Silhouettes against the stars. No lanterns, no words. Silas crouched beside the wagon brush. You recognize them? Callahan narrowed his eyes. The one on the left rides with Marshal Vane. Silas's heart thudded. Vane sent you up for treason. I know. And now he's trying to clean up the lie. They moved fast, down the slope, pistols drawn. The campfire glowed soft, its light betraying the bedroll. But Emma was gone. Silas had wrapped her inside his saddle blanket and stashed her beneath the low-shelf rock behind the tree. The first rider approached the camp. Callahan, he hissed. We know you're here. Let's make this easy. Callahan waited until the second rider passed him by, then struck. A single brutal hit with the rifle butt dropped the man sideways. Silas lunged from the opposite side and fired once. The other man toppled, not dead, but down. Silas stood over him, weapon raised. Who sent you? The rider spit blood. Marshal Vane. What were the orders? Burn the papers, kill the kid, Make sure no names reach Benton." Silas kicked the man in the ribs. "That kid's my niece." The rider laughed through cracked teeth. "Then you best start digging another grave, Uncle." Callahan's voice was low. "We keep him?" "No," Silas said. "He dies." But Emma made a sound behind them, just a whimper. Silas froze, then holstered his gun. "We tie him," he muttered. "Leave him for the buzzards." By morning the man was gone. Rope cut, tracks scattered. Callahan looked at Silas. "We'll see him again." "I know." They broke camp early. As they rode, Emma sat upright in front of Silas, eyes scanning the horizon. Every so often she looked back at Callahan. Not fearful, just watchful. At midday, they passed a mile marker carved into stone. Benton, 12 miles. Silas reined in his horse. "There's someone we need to see before we deliver that letter." "Who?" Silas pointed east. "Jonah's widow." Callahan blinked. "He was married? Didn't know that?" "No. She never forgave me," Silas said. "But she might know who else is tied up in this." They rode east into the hills. At the top of a rise beneath a crooked pine stood a worn ranch house with a rusted bell hanging off the porch. A woman sat in a rocker with a shotgun across her lap. She didn't rise when they approached. "Silas Greeley," she said coldly. He tipped his hat. "I brought someone." Her eyes moved past him to Emma, and her face cracked. She was real. She whispered. Silas nodded. This man carried her from the fire, along with Jonah's last words. She stood slowly, walked to the edge of the porch. Emma reached out. The woman's hands trembled as she took her. And then, in a voice clear and impossible, Emma said, "Mama." Everyone froze. Even the wind stopped. "She remembers," Callahan said quietly. The woman pulled Emma to her chest, crying now, whispering prayers into her hair. Silas stepped back. Callahan looked at him. "You still think blood is just blood?" Silas shook his head. "No, it's what we do with it that matters." The porch creaked beneath their boots as Silas and Callahan stood guard, giving Jonah's widow time alone with the child. She rocked slowly in her chair, whispering to Emma, tears cutting lines through the dust on her cheeks. The shotgun lay forgotten at her feet. "She never knew the girl survived," Silas murmured, watching them from the edge of the steps. Callahan adjusted the saddle cinch on his horse. "Sometimes not knowing is the only thing that lets you keep breathing." Silas looked at him. "That how you lived this long?" Callahan didn't answer. From inside the house, the widow reappeared in the doorway, holding a tin box in her hand. She motioned them in. They stepped across the threshold like men entering a church. The interior was spare, clean, quiet, smelling of cedar and old grief. A single photograph sat on the mantel, Jonah in his deputy's coat, hand on the shoulder of a woman younger by 10 years, but with the same watchful eyes. She set the box on the table and opened it. "Jonah kept copies," she said. "He didn't trust anyone, not even the marshal's office. These are affidavits, records of land swaps, signed under seal. Vane's name is on 3 of them." Silas whistled low. "That's enough to put him in irons." "No," she said. "That's enough to get us all killed if we're not careful." Callahan studied the papers. "This is why they wanted the girl dead. She was there. She saw the fire. She remembers voices, faces. She's not just a child. They know she's a witness." Silas nodded. "Then they'll come again." "Soon," Callahan added. "The man who escaped last night won't stay gone long." The widow pulled a worn revolver from the drawer and laid it on the table. I want in. Callahan shook his head. You've already lost enough. I didn't get to bury my husband, she said. Didn't get to name my daughter. You don't get to tell me what's enough. Emma toddled in just then, hands sticky with bread, eyes bright. She climbed into Silas's lap without hesitation. He froze, then held her. She's going to get you killed, the widow said softly. Silas looked down. Wouldn't be the worst way to go. That night they slept in shifts. The wind picked up around midnight, bringing with it the scent of horses and sweat. Callahan was already at the window when the first shadow passed the barn. He nudged Silas. We've got company. How many? 6. Maybe more. Quiet, though. Professional. Silas stood, holstered his Colt. Vane's men, or worse. The widow took Emma into the root cellar and barred the hatch behind her. Callahan checked his rifle. We hold here? Silas nodded. For Jonah. For her. Then came the crash. Glass shattering from the rear. 2 men came through the parlor. Callahan dropped one with a shot through the sternum. Silas tackled the second into the wall, wrestled his gun free, and cracked him across the jaw with the butt of his Colt. Gunfire erupted outside. The front window blew open. A bullet grazed Silas's shoulder. He grunted, spun, and returned fire, hitting a shadow on the porch. Callahan kicked the front door open and stepped into the night. A rider charged from the dark. Callahan fired once. Dead center. The horse screamed and toppled. The rider never rose. Inside, Silas reloaded. Blood trickled down his arm, but his hand was steady. Emma safe? He yelled. The widow's voice came muffled. Alive. Then came the voice they dreaded. Marshal Vane. Greeley, he bellowed from beyond the trees. You're harboring a traitor and a child under warrant. Hand them over and walk away. Silas stepped outside. Callahan stood beside him. I buried my brother for listening to you, Silas called. I'm not doing it twice. Vane laughed. You think this ends with you? That child's just ink in a ledger. No, Silas said, lifting his badge. She's the one who'll rewrite it. He tossed the badge into the dirt. I'm done wearing that. Vane's reply was a bullet. It struck the doorframe inches from Silas's head, and just like that, the fight was on. Gunfire roared. The porch lit up with muzzle flashes. Silas dropped to one knee and shot twice. 1 man down, then another. Callahan charged the tree line, rifle barking, weaving through shadow and flame. And inside the house, the widow held Emma close, whispering not prayers, but promises. Outside, Vane retreated into the trees, calling for the last of his men. Silas and Callahan stood back to back, panting, the night around them heavy with smoke. Still think this was just a letter? Callahan asked. Silas stared at the house, at first. And now? Silas looked toward the root cellar. Now it's a future. By dawn the smoke had settled, and the ground outside the house was soaked in blood and broken vows. 5 bodies lay still under the pale light. Vane's men, dead or dying. The widow stepped from the cellar with Emma on her hip, squinting into the carnage with the steady calm of someone long past shock. Callahan leaned against the porch post, shoulder bandaged, rifle still in reach. Silas crouched beside the last man, breathing. A shot-up gunner with fear bleeding through his shirt faster than blood. Silas grabbed a fistful of his collar. Where's Vane? The man coughed, rode off, north. Alone? No, he wheezed. He's got a wire. To Amarillo. Says he's bringing everything. Silas let go. The man sagged, died minutes later with his mouth still open. The widow stood over the bodies, Emma tucked under her shawl. "This ain't the last wave," she said. Silas nodded. "We never thought it would be." Inside, Callahan laid out the letters, Jonah's, the affidavits, and the deeds, everything tied to the land fraud, the judge's murder, and the girl. "What now?" he asked Silas. "We go to Benton," Silas said. "Straight to Judge Harper." The widow raised an eyebrow. "You think Harper's clean?" "That he was Jonah's friend," Silas said. Callahan snorted. "And now, Jonah's dead." Silas turned slowly. "You don't have to come." Callahan looked at Emma. "I do." They gathered supplies, burned what they couldn't carry, and buried the bodies behind the barn. Before they left, the widow nailed Jonah's badge, scorched and cracked, into the post by the door. "Let 'em know what kind of man lived here," she said. They rode with the sun behind them and the wind pulling dust from their boots. Silas led, Callahan flanked, and the widow carried Emma tight, her rifle tied to the saddle. By dusk, they reached a dry bluff where an old Union telegraph station once stood. It was empty now, abandoned after the tracks moved west, but the wires still worked. Silas dismounted and tapped a message to Judge Harper. "Urgent. Evidence of marshal conspiracy. En route. Bringing witness and survivor. Request safe passage. Silas Greeley." He waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then the wire hissed back. "Ride fast. Trust no one. Harper." Callahan read the return. Not comforting. "Better than silence," Silas muttered. They camped that night just below the bluffs. Emma lay between them, blanket curled under her chin. The widow slept with one hand on her rifle and the other on the child. Silas stared into the fire. "Jonah raised me," he said. "After our ma died. He could have left. Plenty of brothers did back then. But he stayed. Made sure I ate. Taught me how to hold a gun and when to put it down." Callahan didn't speak. Silas looked at him. "You were his friend?" "We served together. I watched him try to bring truth into a system already bought and paid for." "Why'd you leave it all behind?" Callahan answered with a question. "You ever carry a child through fire, Silas?" "No, I did. And when she cried, and her father didn't move, and when the walls came down around us, that's when I stopped caring what men like Vane wrote on paper." Silas nodded, then reached into his coat and handed him Jonah's final letter. Callahan unfolded it, read silently, and when he reached the last line, he looked up. "He trusted you." "I didn't earn it," Silas said. "No," Callahan agreed, "but maybe you will." Just before dawn, a sound broke the silence. Emma. She sat up, blinking, pointing at the fire. "Mama," she said. The widow stirred, smiled faintly. "No, baby girl," she whispered, pulling her close. "Mama's gone." Emma looked toward Callahan, then toward Silas, and softly, like breath, she said, "Papa." Silas froze. Callahan looked away. The widow placed a hand on Silas's shoulder. "She knows something, whether blood or memory." Silas swallowed hard. "Then I better live like she's right." As the sun rose, they packed their gear. The courthouse waited. So did justice. The town of Benton shimmered beneath the noon heat like a mirage. A courthouse, a rail depot, a few streets stitched together by law and suspicion. As Silas, Callahan, the widow, and Emma rode in through the West Road, faces turned. Shopkeepers paused. A deputy by the telegraph office squinted, adjusted his belt, and disappeared inside without a word. Too quiet, Callahan muttered. Silas agreed. They know we're coming. They dismounted in front of the courthouse. A thin man in a black frock coat stepped out to meet them. Judge Harper, grayer and smaller than Silas remembered, but still standing like truth was something worth wearing on your chest. Silas, Harper said. Been a long time. Too long. The judge's eyes drifted to the child, then to Callahan, then to the badge on Silas's hip. Tarnished, not pinned. Let's not speak out here, Harper said. Come inside. In the chambers, the doors were locked, curtains drawn. The widow laid the documents across Harper's desk. Affidavits, property deeds, Jonah's letter. Harper read in silence. When he finished, he placed a trembling hand on the page bearing Marshal Vane's signature. This is enough to bring the whole board down, he said. Callahan leaned forward. Then why do you look like a man already mourning the verdict? Harper met his eyes. Because I've already received a summons. Vane's men are en route with federal backing. They say they're taking custody of all witnesses and evidence. How long? Silas asked. An hour, maybe less. Callahan looked at the window. Then we need to disappear. No, the widow said. We make our stand here. This is where Jonah's voice gets heard. Harper shook his head. They'll burn this place. Then let it burn, Silas said, standing, but not before the town hears what we've got. He strode to the front steps and rang the courthouse bell. Townsfolk trickled in, shopkeepers, ranch hands, a few deputies still wearing neutral faces. Harper stepped onto the porch with Jonah's letter in hand and read aloud, voice rising with every name, every crime, every silent betrayal. Gasps echoed. A few men left. One wept. Then came the riders. Dust cloud rising behind 20 men led by Marshal Vane himself, silver star gleaming like a blade. They halted at the square. Vane dismounted, adjusted his gloves, and called up, Silas Greeley, you are obstructing a federal investigation. Hand over the witnesses and the child. Silas stepped forward. That child is a survivor. These people are witnesses, and you're a traitor to every oath you ever swore. You got proof? Vane sneered. Harper held up the documents. Then hand it down, Vane said. Let the law sort it. Callahan joined Silas. You mean your law? Vane's hand dropped to his sidearm. The townsfolk tensed. Then Emma's voice pierced the silence. Jonah. Everyone turned. She was sitting beside the courthouse pillar, staring at Vane. Jonah, she said again, quieter. Vane's hand twitched. That name don't mean nothing to you, he growled. She remembers, the widow said. She watched her house burn, watched you stand there. Laughter cracked from Vane's mouth. She was a baby. She saw enough, Silas said, and she spoke it here, in front of your men, in front of this town. Vane's men shifted. Some looked away. One lowered his rifle. You gonna shoot a child to bury her memory? Callahan asked. Vane drew, but Silas was faster. One shot. Vane staggered back, hole blooming in his chest, disbelief frozen in his eyes as he collapsed in the dirt. The square held its breath. Then Harper said, clear and calm, arrest the remaining men. Bring the ledger and the child inside. The court is now in session. Silas holstered his Colt, exhaled. Emma ran to him, arms raised. He lifted her high and held her to his chest. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She just rested her head over his heart. The trial lasted 3 days, not the kind with powdered wigs and polished speeches, but one soaked in truth and carried on the backs of witnesses who had long kept their mouths shut out of fear. Judge Harper convened the court in the open square, beneath the shattered bell that once tolled for land deals and hanging days. Each morning, the townsfolk gathered, ranchers, widows, former deputies with shame in their eyes. Each afternoon, another piece of the conspiracy unraveled, forged deeds, bribes hidden in cattle shipments, signatures of men now long buried or long vanished. Callahan testified first. Calm, direct. He recounted the fire that killed the circuit judge, the child he carried from the wreckage, the blood-soaked ride through counties that looked the other way. He didn't embellish, didn't flinch. Then came the widow. She read Jonah's last letter aloud, and the town finally wept. Silas didn't speak until the final morning. He stood beside the judge's bench, Emma in his arms, and stared down the remnants of Vane's faction, those who hadn't fled. "My brother believed in the badge," he said. "I believed in silence. That silence killed him, almost killed her, and almost killed what little soul I had left." He looked down at Emma. She blinked up at him, calm as ever. "I aim to change that." That evening the court handed down its ruling. The surviving marshals were stripped of rank, land deeds revoked, warrants issued, and an agreement was made. Emma would remain under the widow's care, with Silas as her legal guardian. When Harper handed down the orders, he removed his own robe. "I'm done," he said. "You don't pass judgment like this without paying for it somewhere down the line." Silas stepped off the porch and stood in the street as the sun began to fall. Callahan met him there. "You staying?" he asked. Silas looked at the courthouse, then at the child, now riding on the widow's hip, a small hand resting on her shoulder. "No," he said, "but I'll be close." Callahan smiled faintly. "Back to wandering?" Silas nodded. "Justice has its place, but sometimes it needs a man outside the ledger." The widow approached. "Where will you go?" "Where truth's still hiding," he said. She stepped forward and handed him something, Jonah's old deputy badge, polished and silent. "I thought you didn't want this back," she said. "I don't," he replied, "but maybe she will, one day." He handed it to Emma. She gripped it with both hands. Then she looked up and spoke again, her voice clear, soft, filled with something more than memory. "Papa." Callahan looked away, but the widow smiled. Silas froze. Tears didn't come. They didn't need to. He stepped forward, knelt, kissed her forehead, then mounted his horse. "Raise her strong," he said. "Raise her honest." He turned, without looking back, and rode west into the fire-painted dusk, carrying no badge, no wire, no reward. Just a name, clean now, and a promise kept. Justice rides fast, but sometimes mercy rides faster. Some stories don't end with vengeance or victory, but with a whispered name from the mouth of a child who refused to forget. Silas Greeley didn't redeem the past. He honored it, one hard choice at a time. And in a land where justice often arrives on horseback and leaves behind smoke, it was mercy that stayed. A letter, a baby, a burned-down lie. These were the embers that lit a new trail, the kind that doesn't need gallows to find the truth, only courage and the will to listen when a child speaks her father's name.